In this video, I'm going to walk you through this sample email template that you might use to follow up on a weekend trip. And here specifically, I'm referring to a situation where you've gone on a weekend trip to New York or London or another financial center like that, and you've set up a lot of informational interviews with bankers, you've met with a lot of them, and now it's drawing close to recruiting season. Your weekend trip was maybe a week or two ago. You have a few weeks before recruiting begins, and you want to be able to follow up and make the appropriate request to this person. So just to start with, as I mentioned here, you do really have a huge advantage after you've met someone in person. And this applies for far more than just getting a job or just getting into investment banking, by the way. Whether you're trying to find new business partners or trying to find a tutor or you're trying to find employees if you own a business or anything else really, as soon as you've met someone in person, you have a completely different type of relationship as opposed to if you've just traded emails or phone calls with them. And I've found that actually people are very worried sometimes about making a good impression in person, but usually it's actually very difficult to mess that part up if you've already talked to them over the phone or over email, and now you've requested an in-person meeting and you actually meet with them on your weekend trip. Usually they have a decent idea of who you are, and if they already like you, the in-person meeting will only strengthen that relationship. So I would not worry too much about that part. And of course, after meeting someone, you can follow up to ask for a lot of different things. You could just ask more questions, get more referrals, suggest future meetings, but this email template is going to be focused on what you're probably most interested in, which is how to convert these relationships and all these meetings and all this networking that you've done into interviews and actually getting offers at this firm. And actually, it's quite easy to do. At least it's quite easy to send the email request to them. I would probably email them the request as opposed to calling at first, especially if you've already met them in person. You could consider calling, but I would probably only do that if you're on a really strict timeline or, for example, if they've been unresponsive to email. And just some guidelines on this. As with all emails, you want to be short and straight to the point. The only email where you could consider writing more than maybe one or two paragraphs is when you're first meeting someone and first trying to set up an informational interview. And you can look at that template for an idea of what to write there. But for any type of follow-up email, always keep it short and get to the point. And I think the main problem, the main decision that you have to make with this type of request is when do you send it? So chances are, if you've conducted all these informational interviews and gone through an entire weekend trip or two or three, you have a pretty good set of relationships. And so now the question is, when do you decide to make the ask? And I think the best guideline is if it's close to recruiting season, say within a couple weeks, then I would do it right away. Make sure you're on their interview list. That timing of a couple weeks also gives you time to follow up in case they're not responsive right away. Now, if your trip was in September, let's say, and you're going to be taking advantage of summer internship recruiting in the winter, then I would not follow up right away to ask about how to get on the interview list. What I would probably do is maybe send one or two follow-up emails in between, maybe asking specific questions or just asking about some kind of personal item, something like that. And then what you can do is when it gets to be December, then you email them and reach out and say, hey, I enjoyed meeting you a few months ago. I enjoyed hearing about these specific topics from you. I just wanted to reiterate my interest and see how I could best position myself for an interview at your firm. So in general, I would say the longer the time between your meeting and recruiting season, the more you want to follow up a bit in between and then make the ask when it gets to be closer to recruiting season. If it is already close to recruiting season, or maybe if you're in the midst of recruiting season, then you definitely want to be very direct and follow up as soon as possible, preferably within the week after your meeting with the person. And I say here that this email is for someone more senior, but to be honest, you can really use this for almost anyone, whether it's an analyst or even managing director or anyone in between. Now, if it's an analyst, then you might be a little bit more informal than this. The language could be a bit different, but the same basic idea applies. So here's the template. So you see right here, follow up from meeting and city name on date. And I have the date here, but it doesn't really matter too much. You could write something like follow up from meeting in New York last week, for example. That's also fine. So you can take a couple different approaches here, but definitely put meeting, definitely put the location name, the city that you went to, and the timing, whether it was last week or 2 weeks ago or longer than that. Start with their first name. If you met someone in person, it's pretty much always appropriate to use their first name. And then just an introductory sentence. Thanks again for meeting with me last week. I really enjoyed hearing about. And then this could be really anything. Could be a vacation, could be their ski trip, could be their recent wedding, could be a variety of different things. It could be a deal they're working on. Anything is fine. You just want to jog their memory and make them say, oh, okay, I remember speaking with that person about that. And then the next sentence, we get straight to the point here. I just wanted to reiterate my interest in your firm and see how I could best position myself for an interview for a, and then, so for example, if you're going for summer analyst positions, then that's what you put right here for a summer analyst position or summer associate position. And that's pretty much that. You might be surprised at how simple this email is, but I really strongly encourage you to keep follow-up emails and any type of follow-up communication very simple. Because if you've already met someone, already made a good impression, and had some interactions with them, if you need something or you want something, just ask for it. That's the easiest way to get whatever it is you're looking for. Just to add some commentary on this, again, this person has conducted his weekend trip fairly close to when recruiting season begins. So he's decided to follow up very quickly, which is a good decision because what this means is that not only is the person more likely to remember the meeting and everything about him, but it also gives him time to follow up in case he doesn't get a response right away. And then, of course, he's kept it short and gotten straight to the point. Basically, he's just saying, I like meeting you. Can you help me get an interview? Of course, you don't want to say that directly. You want to use different language as we have here, but that's basically what he's saying. And in terms of responses here, I would say if you don't get a response, I would just call the person the week after to follow up. If you've already spoken on the phone, traded emails, and met in person, perfectly fine. You may be uncomfortable doing this, but trust me, you have to be very persistent and make sure you're on everyone's list and make sure everyone knows who you are when it comes to networking. And I would say actually the more uncomfortable you are in situations like this, the better off you are. And it's somewhat counterintuitive, but I really think you have to push your comfort zone and get out of your comfort zone if you want to succeed with networking like this, especially if you haven't done much networking before and a lot of these concepts are foreign to you. But that's a quick overview of what you would do to follow up after an in-person meeting during a weekend trip. It's really not too complicated. Again, the main issue is timing. The substance of the email is very similar to some of the other templates that we went over in this course. I just include this because it is slightly different, and the issue you face, timing, is a bit different from what we saw in some of the other templates. But that's a quick overview of how to do it. Hopefully now you have a better idea of how to follow up on in-person meetings and then how to convert them into getting interviews and then offers at the firm.